Hey everyone, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. I am Hannah Swanson, Senior Director of Marketing here at Intentsify. I am joined today by two of the smartest marketers I know, one of which I'm lucky to have on my team, Meghan Crook Brisson, Senior Content Marketing Manager at Intentsify, and of course, none other than Jessica Fewless, Demand Gen Leader and Partner Marketing Extraordinaire at Inverta. These ladies are here today to show you how to rebuild your nurture strategy so that it actually works. I'm so excited for you to see that strategy and the process they've outlined for this webinar, because it really is the secret sauce to ensuring you're building pipeline 24/7, or as Jess would say, in your sleep. But before I pass it over to them, I just want to note a few quick housekeeping items. First, this webinar is being recorded and we will be distributing it following the event. Second, we do have Q&A open throughout the event, so we'll be answering as many questions as we can at the end. You'll notice there is a chat option too. If you want to cheer us on in there, we absolutely would love that, but we will not be monitoring it. So just make sure any of the actual questions do end up in the actual Q&A box. Last but not least, please find your speakers today on LinkedIn so we can keep the conversation going. And with that, I will pass it over to Meghan to kick us off, and I will see you all again during the Q&A.
Thanks, Hannah. Thank you so much, Hannah. So I'll kick it off. We actually had record-breaking registration for this webinar, and I can only assume you signed up for one main reason, and it's that nurture is really hard. As marketers, our goal is to cultivate relationships with potential customers and help them through the buyer's journey. But somehow along the way, nurture began to mean generic email drips sent to unsuspecting contacts after they download your ebook. And as a lot of us are thinking through our 2025 plans, we know we can do better. And so, Jessica, I actually had to Google the word nurture just to level set here. So many times in B2B marketing, we commandeer these common words like lead, nurture, but they start to lose all meaning. And I think this is the perfect example of that. To nurture is to care for and encourage growth. But when is the last time you felt cared for by a B2B email drip? So I'm sure we have all set up campaigns like this in our careers. Prospect downloads an asset, perhaps they aren't ready for sales, so let's nurture them until they are ready. The nurture might look like a 3-email drip with more generic content, hoping they take an action to graduate from said nurture. And the big question, is it effective? Sometimes, and there is clearly a place for email, but a lot of times, if the contact didn't request a demo by the end of the 3rd email, they get disqualified and routed to the lead graveyard, waiting for re-engagement. And so we do think we can do better than that. And we're not here to say anything is dead or the old way is out. But as marketers, we are constantly evolving to use the latest and greatest data and to find new authentic ways to cut through the noise. I would say the main challenge marketers are facing is simply timing. We know that prospects are doing most of the research on their own. About 70% of the buyer journey is happening before they talk to sales. So it's less about nudging them, it's about supporting their own research journey. So when they're ready to engage, your brand will be top of mind. Our goal is to end in this middle definition here, to cultivate relationships with your potential customers and help them through their buyer journey. So now, Jessica, we are more than halfway through Q4, which I can't even believe. We are in 2025 planning. How are you doing, and what has been top of mind for you around nurture?
Yeah, so generally, there's a lot of things going on in the marketplace right now, and buyers are buying differently, and really trying to think about like, okay, so how are we going to get to them, right? A lot of folks are talking about kind of the word of mouth economy, right? Referrals that you get from, your partners that are in prospects or customers of yours, or, just, networks, or things like, software review sites like G2, right, are taking more prominence than necessarily, you know, your outbound strategy used to be, more effective, right? So it's like we kind of started off with inbound and then we went to outbound and ABM and all that type of stuff. And partners always kind of been there, but really hasn't been a powerful channel. And now we see kind of heading into 2025 that like, ABM is still an important approach, and it's not like ABM or outbound is dead, right? It's still there, but it's definitely kind of, its efficacy is, it's taking a different approach or a different importance inside of your strategy, but it is not the strategy as it was, say, in 2017, 2018, right? So inbound and partners are kind of taking a bit of a higher priority as we head into 2025. And so to that point, I'm, really thinking about nurture as being something that's really important for me to stay in front of clients, right? There's a lot of research going on talking about, like, 75+% of the buying process happens before anybody reaches out. We know that that's been kind of a trend that's been growing over time. But what we also see is that, like, well over 80% of the time, it's your prospect will be the one that reaches out to you and not vice versa, right? This is kind of that importance of inbound and the importance of being constantly present in front of your prospects. And so that's really where nurture comes in, right? And, as we kind of rebranded it for this session, so you guys are going to hear me switch back and forth because, we've always called it nurture, but we've rebranded it to always on, for a number of different reasons. So Meghan, if you don't mind starting to share our slides, so that, I can kind of walk through a little bit of the difference between nurture and, what we're calling always on, because nurture, as Meghan kind of prefaced here, was, it shouldn't just be a drip email series. It shouldn't, that's boring, right? For most companies, it's going to be seller centric. It is, hey, so, here's all the things you need to know about me as a company, right? And it's very, we have always talked about being customer centric, but nurtures inherently have been seller centric. It's like, okay, I have 3 emails after a new contact comes into my database to tell them everything they need to know about us. That's not a good approach, right? For a number of reasons, not least of which is the fact that people will unsubscribe typically by your 3rd, or if you go so far as 5 emails in your worker or in your welcome nurture. So, it's really seller centric. And that also gets to the point that it lacks any relevance to them. They're like, cool, I sure, that's great that you guys do all those things, but I don't even have a problem you can solve for. So these emails aren't relevant to me. They're only coming in emails. We had Hannah, who kicked off our session today on our podcast earlier this week. And as she put it, she's like, hey, your buyers aren't living in their inboxes day in and day out, right? And I'm sure if there was a raise of hands of everybody on this webinar, you're finding that the efficacy of your email is going down, right? Your open rates, well, we can all talk about open rates. That could be a whole nother webinar on open rates and bots and all that fun stuff. And, but your open rates are probably going down, right? Even potentially your click-through rates. Because once again, people start off their day, they delete all the marketing emails kind of throughout the day. They tend to delete the marketing emails because those are very clear which ones they are. Right. So you're just not getting the engagement there. It's not providing any value to those folks. And last but not least, and something that you're going to hear both Meghan and I bring up repeatedly throughout this webinar, is that it's not triggered on data, right? It's just hey, a new name comes in, we're going to start this email series, right? So once again, getting back to that relevance and those sorts of things, it's not necessarily relevant to the person. So that's why, once again, your unsubscribe rates tend to be so high. So why we've kind of rebranded it to always on is that it's a more dynamic sort of framework once you set it up. And, I'll talk a little bit about, you can over engineer an always on campaign strategy, but really it's about, getting the right kind of content out there into the hands of your prospects and customers, right? To make sure that your organization is staying present. Once again, not always talking about you, but talking about the problems that they're solving for, right? Once again, I think a lot of people are seeing that, there's this conversation of brand versus demand. The brand budgets, the brand prominence inside of 2025 strategies seem to be going up. I was at a conference yesterday and that seemed to be a theme. Right? Is that, once again, you need to get in front of folks with stuff that's actually helpful to them, right? And you need to be refreshing that content to stay relevant. The buyer's journey is changing. You know, if I'm sure we'll all roll our eyes when I say AI is definitely changing how we do our jobs, right? And so, you know, we need to constantly evolve and those sorts of things. And so an always on sort of strategy creates a framework for that. It allows you to kind of create campaigns, a little set it and forget it, with regular like kind of check-ins to monitor and optimize, to refresh content, right? But it allows you to leverage data to continue to have a conversation with and build a relationship with your prospects and customers that you're probably not doing today. So anyway, so that's a little bit about kind of why we've rebranded Always On versus kind of your traditional nurture. So on to the next slide. As I mentioned, you know, the problem with a lot of traditional nurture is it's one note, it's email only. And really, you should be using all of the channels at your disposal. And I'm going to go through the different kind of the core types of nurture or always on campaigns. And I'll talk about kind of the mix of these types of channels that you'll typically use with each one. But you have a lot of channels at your disposal and you should be using them all when it comes to your always on and really thinking about, okay, so yes, I'm still going to send that email, but I'm also going to spend money on display advertising or social advertising or, CCTV, or, if they're your customers, you might throw in something like chat, or SMS, right? Like you're probably not going to text prospects kind of out of the clear blue sky, but you might text a customer of yours, right? So that's where kind of this mix will come in. But really, when it comes to always on, you should really be looking at your full suite of channels to make sure you're ever present in front of your prospects and customers wherever they're spending their day. The next slide. So now we're going to go through kind of the 5 basic types of always on campaigns that, eventually you want to have make up your entire always on framework. So we've got 5 types here. The first one is the welcome campaign. So this is that welcome email nurture series, right? That, most companies, if not all of you in the audience, have today. If you can just flip to the next slide, Megan. That'd be great. Thank you. So, this is really, that you get a new name into your database and you want to talk to them. You may have done content syndication. And as we know, those leads that come in from content syndication can be a little bit tenuous, right? Because they haven't necessarily directly engaged with your company yet. They've engaged with your content, but now your company. So you want to make sure you're reaching out and saying, hi, like we're the company behind this piece of content that you downloaded, right? But once again, providing more value. And this is where, once you get a little bit more sophisticated, you can have multiple welcome nurtures based on where somebody actually entered your database from, right? So today, a number of you have now entered our database from today's webinar, right? So if I just sent you something random about, I don't know, campaign planning or ABM, while that might be interesting to you, right? What would be more relevant is a welcome stream that actually continues the conversation about always on campaigns, right? So that's where, once again, get a basic welcome campaign, but then you can always expand it from there. The next type is a buyer's journey campaign. This one's the really fun one, but this one's also the one that can be the most complicated. So for most clients we work with, we kind of say, tackle this one last, right? Because what this is really going to do is, once you've welcomed somebody into your database and you start to learn some more information about them, you start to see what kind of content they're engaging with and those sorts of things, then you can put them into specific buyer journey campaigns based on their interests, based on their, third-party intent data, based on, first-party data of how they're engaging with your website or your other content, right? So this is where you can really build some sophisticated campaigns. And once again, knowing some of their intent signals, you might know where they are in the buyer's journey. So you can be at the top of the funnel. You can be like, hey, you don't even know you have a problem yet. You've just kind of come into us, right? Let me help you, educate you on the problem you have. But as they start to move through the funnel, then you could be like, okay, so you have this problem. Here's how, you might think about solving for that problem. And oh, by the way, we're the best in the business at it. So you should probably take a look at us, right? So really kind of, kind of tailoring that message based on where they are in the buyer's journey, as well as what they're showing intent in. So for what product or service of yours might also be relevant to them. The next one is the customer lifecycle campaign. Love this one. This one provides a little bit of air cover to both your CSM team as well as your AE team. Obviously, most organizations will have some sort of a CSM or customer support function, but why not take the burden off of them to make sure that all the basics get in the hand of the customer? Why doesn't marketing actually make sure that that happens through an always on type of campaign? And then obviously, as they go through their life cycle with you, as they've, started to adopt your product or really become masters of using your product, okay, what's next? Right. And now, your CSM might have a spidey sense of what's next for them, but you're also going to have a lot of data that's going to tell you what's potentially next in line. And so marketing can set up trigger-based campaigns to help start to plant the seed with, hey, here's something else you might want to look at from our company, or here's some other use cases you might want to think of, right? So once again, so the onus is not completely on your CSM, but rather marketing can provide a helping hand. And this one's the interesting one. This one's where there's a lot of unique channels you can leverage, right? From, like I said, texting potentially is a channel you can use. That in-product marketing, that one's really important, right? Making sure you're getting in front of them, not just putting up your NPS survey, which is important from a marketing perspective, but you can also be nurturing them within the product to kind of increase their adoption, and even, like I said, kind of signal to them some other products they might be interested in from you. Next is close lost. Behind welcome, I would say this is the next one that you probably want to put in place, because this one's pretty easy, right? You typically know how long a sales cycle is. Hopefully your sales team is feeding close lost reasons into your Salesforce systems. If they're not, you might want to encourage them to start doing that. And this is where, once again, sure, could an SDR have a trigger that says, yeah, I'm gonna at the 120-day mark, I'm gonna reach back out to that client? Maybe. But why doesn't marketing, once again, provide that air cover, do that first touch, reach out, or maybe the first few touches? Hey, here's some new things that you didn't know about us, those sorts of things. And kind of, once again, prime the pump so that your sales team can then, re-engage and quickly move those into pipeline and hopefully closed one down the line. And then the last one is the keep in touch campaign. And this is kind of when you've exhausted all the rest of your nurture, and there might not be another point in time campaign happening within your organization. This is where you can just stay in front. Once again, stay relevant to that client, continue to provide value, educate them, right? And stay front and center so that if, maybe they went through all these other nurtures, they didn't have a problem at that time. All of a sudden, 6 months down the line, they do, and you send them a quarterly roundup. That's kind of like, here's all the latest thinking from my company, right? That might be the trigger. They're like, oh, right, those guys, they do that, right? And all of a sudden you get an inbound phone call. So those are the 5 different types of always on campaigns that I would say, as you build out your always on strategy, that you want to have, one or multiples of each of those in kind of your quiver from an always on perspective.
Awesome. I love these always on campaign types. I think it helps us wrangle kind of an overwhelming concept and gives you, okay, let's start with one, add a second. Not every company is going to have all 5. Some might have one, and might even be a hybrid of these. So you can kind of make it your own. I think what's important to know, and I'll reiterate what Jessica's saying, is that really you're trying to meet your prospects where they are and at the right time. And they aren't always in their inbox. By knowing the who, the when, and the where of your select touch point, that requires some data. And so that's what I'm going to get into next, is how you know how to reach your people. So this is what we're calling signal-based marketing. This is the signal-based strategy. The signals we're talking about are the data. Intent data is derived from first, second, and third-party sources, things like website visits, content downloads, social media behavior, etc. And in order to build and fuel one of these always-on campaigns that Jessica shared, we need to first understand our buyer's journey and their needs at each stage, and then map your messages and content to those stages. So it's like a giant puzzle. To build the campaign, we need to figure out the who, what, why, where of it all. So I will say that the hard part is not acquiring the data, but figuring out how to activate it. This honestly is where Intentsify shines and does a lot of the heavy lifting for us.
Yeah, it's definitely, honestly, yeah, no company has a dearth of data, right? But honestly, within our client base, that's what we find to be the most challenging part is they're like, I've got all this data. How do I actually operationalize it? How do I action it? It's, there's a lot of discussion around intent data. Is it living up to the hype and the promise and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it is if you know what to do with it, right? And how to combine it with your first party data. And that's why, we've kind of, and I know Intentsify kind of led the charge on this, was referring to it as signal-based marketing versus intent-based, right? Because it's not just third-party intent, but it's all the data sources you have. And then once again, how marketing action on it, and even, I wouldn't say more importantly, but equally important, is how you enable your sales team to actually action on it. Is really honestly the sticking point, 95% of our clients have when it comes to data. So Meghan, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
No,
if you're sitting out there going, I don't know what to do with my data, you are
yeah, it's so true. It's cool to hear from your perspective what you hear from clients. And, we hear the same thing from customers. And, you know, most of us are marketers probably on this call. I'm a marketer. I'm not a data scientist. I'm not a data expert. I work in this company now and I've learned quite a bit about it. But I think that's why we have tools to help us. We're trying to reach our marketing goals using data. And that's where, like I said, Intentsify does the heavy lifting for us. So if you look at this middle section, what Intentsify's AI is doing is it's interpreting and weighting the topics and keywords you have that are specific and relevant to your company solution. And so then our algorithm then organizes your target accounts and personas into research stages based on these aggregated signals. So that's a lot, and we'll kind of walk through some of those stages, but that's the power of the platform and makes it easy. So in that bottom screenshot, you'll see the different stages. This is directly from our intent model for Intentsify. You'll see the different accounts in the different stages, and then we're going to be able to start to action on those. And I will say too that these stages are ideally going to change. So as a prospect does more research, it's not static. It's a one-time view of the number of counts per stage. So when it comes to, marketing by buyer stage, this is the first hurdle, is determining the stages. Now we can map our content to those research stages. So I think before I go into this chart, I am a content marketer. In order to do this, you need a good content inventory for any of these always on campaigns. So if you're lacking in content, I would say build that up first. Start small, pick one of the campaigns, and you can always add on from there. From here, this kind of cheat sheet, you can map the content to the buyer stage. I'm not going to read through all the descriptions, but you kind of get the gist that each stage, awareness, interest, consideration, decision, has a different message theme, things you're trying to get across, and then you can decide on the best content offer and then ultimately the best distribution channel for that. Also, as a content marketer, I'd say my main charge is to create helpful content. And that sounds really obvious at face value, but a lot of B2B content isn't that. We often make the mistake, myself included, we all have, to create things that we want to say instead of what our audience wants to hear. The crazy new feature, let's create content around that. But does our audience care about it? Maybe, and we have ways to figure that out. So one way is through the data. I think that's a really cool feature in Intentsify platform is you can see the topics that people are researching in your target accounts and maybe make some content around those topics. But also it's a lot of testing. So for example, right now we're running a campaign planning fillable template and it's doing really well on LinkedIn specifically. We're getting a lot of downloads and engagement. So that's just like one example of a test. We're going to keep testing these worksheets and shorter form content on this channel. We're also getting some good feedback about webinars. We've ramped up them a little bit, and we're going to want to keep creating content by marketers for marketers because to us, I mean, I guess that's kind of the perk of a marketer marketing to marketers is we're trying to create things that we would find helpful that help us do our jobs because we're constantly learning as well. And so definitely if there are any other topics, I'll plug here. Feel free to put them in the chat, things that you want to learn about and hear about. We'd probably love to learn them too and happy to kind of dive in together. But let's go back to content here in this context. Content's not created just to convert. Your goal has to start being truly helpful, and then the prospects will come to you when they're ready. Jessica said that earlier on, like let them come to you, and you're kind of building the machine that makes that you're along the way, you're there for the ride, so that you're top of mind. So let's see. The buyer journey is not sequential. It is also not a perfect funnel. I wish it was. As humans, we want that instant gratification of prospect engages with content and then they're ready for sales. But think about even your sales cycle. It could be anywhere from 3 months to a year, depending on your company and offer. Our goal is to reach our buyer with the right message. I feel like a broken record when I say that, but that is the ultimate thing, and it's easier said than done. We're trying to reach them when it's going to resonate as well. So that's why we target by research stage. So there's a lot going on this slide, but if you can see by the research stage, you have different people on their journey. If you're targeting by research stage, then the more channels that you activate, the more chances you have to reach that prospect with that aligned message. For example, if they're not always in their inbox, they might be on LinkedIn, they might see a display ad, they might get your email, they might get a content syndication offer. With this thinking, any channel can be a conversion channel if the timing is right. So I'll give the example of display. Display is typically thought of as a brand awareness play, but it really does depend on the timing. So yes, it mostly is brand awareness, I would say. But if the prospect, for example, is getting a retargeted display ad in the midst of their consideration stage research, it could make all the difference. Here, this is a kind of a snapshot of a buyer research stage, what a buyer research journey could look like. Marketing needs to be popping up along the way to be helpful, not intrusive. And so no matter what word you choose, whether it's nurture, always on, retargeting, we're creating a coordinated conversation across channels based on buying signals. You can see also there are multiple people in the buying group that would influence a sales decision. You'll see these contacts can pop up and enter this always on campaign. I'll do a quick plug while we're talking about signals and intent data that Intentsify just launched buying group intent. Buying group intent is persona level intelligence, which has honestly been a game changer in this industry because we can go deeper than the account level and analyze the research behavior of your key personas within those accounts. So more granular than before. This can be based on the personas you define, say job level, job title, things like that, but also can uncover new personas you might not have been considering. So we also did a whole webinar on this topic a couple months ago with a Forrester analyst if you want to dive deeper. So it's a great concept in theory, meet people where they are, multiple channels, always on campaign, but let's walk through an example to try to solidify it. This is a version of a buyer's journey campaign, which is one of the 5 types Jessica outlined. And this is a little peek into what we do at Intentsify. First, a contact enters our CRM. They can come from any marketing touch point we have, typically content driven for us. For the sake of simplicity, if they fit our ICP, they are considered a lead. When that contact enters, we can start with display advertising for air cover. We want to warm them up and not feel too intrusive. Note that this kind of has a order to it, but it doesn't have to be in this order. And a lot of the touch points can overlap and happen at the same time, but just for a visualization. Next, they will enter a persona-specific email sequence. We have a few tracks established that are 15 emails each. They can exit the sequence at any time when taking a sales-ready action, like requesting a demo. This email sequence is basically a welcome campaign. So we kind of have 2 always-on frameworks happening at the same time. So, our emails kind of set it, forget it. They're put into that track, but we also have these other buyer's journey campaign happening at the same time. We are also going to retarget those leads with content to keep educating them. Again, trying to be as helpful as possible. One channel we use is content syndication. We have also been really intentional with our paid social strategy, particularly LinkedIn. My colleague Kenna also ran a webinar in September all about our intent-driven paid social program. If you want to check it out, it goes really in depth on how we do it. We also published a handy guide about that. But since we use intent data to target on LinkedIn, it has become one of our highest conversion channels and a pivotal part of our always on campaign. And finally, on the end of the circle, we have our organic social media efforts. We can invite our prospects to events and webinars like this one. Our goal is to be a trusted advisor for a solution that they are already researching. That's the key here. Every ad won't be get a demo, talk to sales. It's about sharing the content that honestly we would want to consume if we were in their shoes. Again, we are marketers as well. Once they're in that kind of consideration stage, our BDR team can start their own outreach as well. At Intentsify, our BDRs are actually part of our marketing team. So we think of it as another lever of our marketing strategy that we can pull before they get to sales. So here's an example of our touch points: a display ad in the upper right corner, a welcome email. That's the first touch that they'll get after engaging with one of our marketing content pieces, a LinkedIn ad with actually one of the examples I mentioned earlier, and a webinar invitation. Jessica, I want to say before, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this always on campaign type, specifically the buyer's journey, feels like the most complex to set up. I want to mention that because it is a little high effort, high reward. It's not one of those set it, forget it examples. Each of these channels take a slightly different approach to updating the intent data and buyer stage data. Some channels we found automation workarounds. Some channels like the email sequence can be set it, forget it. It's going to be a mix, but it has the option to be a really high reward.
Sorry, everybody, I was on mute there for a second. It definitely tends to be more work to get it right. And, you know, in the Q&A, somebody asked about like, okay, that's great that it should be all these channels, but how do you coordinate them? And that is where your MOPS team is your best friend. You know, I personally, when I was looking to kind of redo the whole always on framework here at Inverta, that was my first stop, was my MOPS team. I'm like, okay, here's all the things I want to do. Can I do it? Right? Like, what kind of automations can we put in place? Do we have the right technologies that can actually do that? Right? Like, you know, basically through the signals, we're going to end up with basically a segment list for each one of these nurtures. Then how do we operationalize that in all the different systems? And so your MOPS team is the one that's going to be like, okay, we're going to be able to automate these things, and these things we're going to have to do manually. You know, that's, you know, it all depends on your tech stack. You know, and if you have a really creative marketing team or MOPS team like I do, like they can do lots of miracles with tools like Zapier. To create integrations where they don't actually exist natively between technologies. So that would be my suggestion on that front. But you know, to that point on how do you really build this always on strategy, right? And I'm going to go into it, I think, in the next slide, but really establishing your goals and your objectives for this always on strategy. Like I said, a strategy like this is going to take more prominence in 2025 and beyond because of the way buyers are buying, right? But not every single always on campaign that you have is going to be for generating pipeline, right? So being very clear though, why you're doing it and what the objective is really going to help defend your plan, but B, also figure out how you want to fashion it to the desired end result. The next is really understanding your buyer's journey. I feel like Meghan showed a slide earlier that really talked about kind of how you think about the different stages of the buyer's journey, what you want to talk to people about in each stage of the buyer's journey, what kind of content, what's the message, and really what is that CTA? Because if somebody's in, you know, pre-awareness or awareness, like asking for a meeting or trying to get them to pipeline is the wrong objective, right? They don't even know they have a problem. That is your job at that stage to get them to recognize a problem. That is your goal, right? The next stage then is to get them to start considering options for solving their problem, right? There might be a pipeline component, there might not be. There might just be another engagement that gets them to the next stage. That's where you're shooting for pipeline, right? So really being clear about that and really being clear about your buyer's journey. I can't tell you how many clients, when we go to sit down and like talk about the content that they have for building a strategy like this, they're like, we've got the perfect case study and we need to get that in front of everybody. I'm here to tell you, case studies are phenomenal when used appropriately. Once again, if somebody is pre-awareness or awareness phase, they're not going to care about your case study because they don't even know they have a problem to solve for. So your case study is going to fall on deaf ears. Wait until they get more to the consideration phase and then hit them with that killer content, right? Further up, you should be educating and building that relationship. Next, like I said, and that kind of runs through bullets 3 and 4 here, is really the stages and the messages, as well as that content matrix, right? For a lot of companies, you guys have a lot of content. So it might be a matter of doing a content audit and going, okay, we have enough content for these three always on campaigns. These other 2, we've got about 2/3 of the content. Here's some content we're going to need to build. Here's some content we can use as is today, but here's some stuff that like we should do a quick kind of revision to make it more relevant, more current, those sorts of things. That exercise is important just generally as a marketing best practice, but really important for your always on strategy. Then, like I said, coordinating with your content and your MOPS team to make this all come to life. Like I said, I went to my MOPS team first, even when I was just, our always on strategy was a twinkle in my eye. I was like, all right, guys, tell me what I can and cannot do based on what we have in our tech stack and our capabilities and those sorts of things. But then really coming back to them once you've thought about that framework and saying, okay, now help keep me honest here. Can we do all this? Next is that data and the technology you're going to use. Really understanding, once again, you've got a lot of data, you've got a lot of signals. How are you actually going to operationalize that and turn that into your always, and to get that to power your always on strategy? Monitoring and optimizing is also getting that in place is going to be really important. A lot of people think nurture and always on is set it and forget it, and it is to some extent, but you still need to monitor and you still need to optimize it over time. And as I'll talk about, there's a certain cadence with which these need to be refreshed, right? Because if you just have them out there for 2 years, you're welcome. If you're welcome or email or your welcome always on campaign, if you leave that static for 2 years, I can guarantee you that became irrelevant about 18 months ago. Right? So you have to be constantly looking at it, refreshing, putting new content, new thinking out there that makes you seem very relevant to them. And then last but not least, you want to build the framework and really figuring out how are these all going to work together, right? How do you coordinate all of this? What are the order of operations that dictate who goes into which always on campaign? So I said I was going to get into the KPIs and metrics of it. Once again, these are just suggestions. Sometimes you might have a welcome campaign that in fact does have pipeline as an objective. That might just be dictated by your organization, or maybe that's the way you set it up. You might, have one that's like the direct line to pipeline because you have a really short sales cycle with a certain segment of your ICP. And that makes sense for your welcome. But in general, you're probably not going to have a pipeline goal for your welcome nurture, because that's not the goal of it. The goal of it is to make sure they're familiar with your organization. The buyer's journey, right? You want to continue that education. You want to get engagement, right? Really looking at those engagement metrics. But then here's where you're going to start to like build in that pipeline, right? If you're trying to work them down a certain path towards a certain product, right? Pipeline is going to be your goal. The customer life cycle, this was one where, on the front end of a customer life cycle, your goals are going to be different than on the back end, right? On the front end, you're just making sure that they're adopting your product, they're using your product, they're adding more users within their organization if that's your business model. And then on the back end, that's where, when they're kind of settled and they're using it, okay, how do you plant those seeds to actually get them to buy more further down the line? Close lost. That is absolutely a pipeline play, right? You lost business 4 months ago. You want to convert it back to an active pipeline opportunity for you. That is the goal of close lost. And then last but not least is keep in touch. That's also not necessarily going to be a pipeline play. You're just there to continue the conversation, continue to build the relevance, the relationship, and be your authentic self to this organization so that when in fact they do have a problem, you're going to be the first ones they call. And then what's the what's the next slide here? Yeah, there we go. And then the common pitfalls. I knew that one was coming up. So like I said, most people don't think of it as a full strategy. They think of it as one campaign. You want to think of it as a full framework, right? What are all the different types of nurtures you're going to have in place? And once again, think big, but start small, right? Like I said, for most organizations, start with one welcome nurture, start with one close lost nurture, right? And then from there, you could move into buyer's journey or customer, or maybe what you do is you actually develop 2 or 3 welcomes based on intent signals or first party data that's telling you, okay, of all the things we do, here's the 3 kind of segments we would put people into, or different personas for that matter, right? And build out multiple welcomes. And then for closed lost, maybe you would start off with just one closed lost kind of, wake from the dead kind of campaign. But then if your sales team has gotten good about putting in the closed lost reason, then you can build a closed lost per closed lost reason, right? And then you can add on customers and the buyer's journey. And then once again, that always on. Being very clear about the objectives, just like I said on the last slide, right? It's not always about pipeline. So being very clear on what the goals are for each one. Don't overcomplicate it. When I went to build our framework, my eyes were bigger than my stomach, and I'm like, oh my God, it's gonna be great. We're gonna do it. We're gonna be masters of always on out of the gates, and we're gonna have 20 different nurture campaigns based on all of these different signals. And honestly, like my MOPS team brought me back to ground level and said, can we just start with 1 or 2? Love that you have a vision, and we want to have that in mind as we build this out, but we're going to start small and grow over time. And then last but not least is the order of operations. And this is where you want to have alignment within your marketing team, as well as your sales team, because at any given point, one individual or one company, if you're doing account-based, could qualify for 3 different nurtures. So how do you know which one to put them in? Right. So that's where you can say, well, this is our top nurture. This is the number one because it's driving the pipeline and blah, blah, blah. So if somebody qualifies for 4 different ones, they go into this one first, and then maybe they, go into this next one, second, third, fourth. But also thinking about if you've got point in time demand gen campaigns, right? When does that take precedence over an always on campaign? So that's obviously an alignment discussion within your marketing team, but also with your sales counterpart. So with that, I think it's back over to you, Megan.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I will say, we can move into some Q&A, but we're not perfect at this. We're still learning. A lot of these learnings have been recent ones. We're figuring out the best way. We don't have all 5 always on campaigns at Intentsify, and I'm sure we'll continue to make some mistakes and figure it out. That's part of being a marketer. But Hannah, I know you've been moderating some questions. I'd love to hear what you have.
Yeah, I have. I have been trying to group them and bundle them, so that way we can answer as many as we possibly can. There's a lot of overlap. The one that I moved up right to the top because I feel like this is all encompassing. Where should we start if we have no always on campaigns?
Yeah. So like I said, the easiest one and the one that I think you want to get in kind of ground level is a good solid welcome nurture. Once again, if you don't even mention your company's name in your welcome, that's an over exaggeration. Obviously, you're going to mention your company's name, but it should all be about education and getting them to getting the recipient to understand that you get them, you get their problems, you understand, who they are as an individual, what their challenges are, and those sorts of things. I personally, in a welcome, I would never talk to them about your product or your service, right? I would keep it really high level. They're going to connect the dots, right? If you deliver 3 killer ebooks over the course of a 3 email, welcome campaign, they're going to connect the dots that you can help them with those things, right? Trust, buyers are smart, right? Trust in your buyer and, give them that information. And then the other one, like I said, is close lost. I can't tell you how many close lost I've put in place. And it is just it's a pipeline workhorse, right? Because you absolutely have to talk to your sales team. You have to understand your sales cycle. But for most organizations, they're like, okay, when somebody buys a competitor, we're in the services business. So we go in pretty quickly, because if we know they made a wrong decision, being as humble as we are, if we know that they made a wrong decision and going with a competitor of ours, we're in there probably within 90 days, because we're pretty sure that the client will have figured that out within 90 days. And we're like, hey, how's it going? Just here to be helpful. By the way, if you want to talk to us again, but for a software deal where, it's typically multi-year contracts, maybe you let it go for a year and then you get back into the fold, right? So, but those two, I would say, are the two places to start and then build from there.
Love it. That actually, I'm skipping around the order I created, but this is actually a good one for a follow-up. What if your target or the contact comes in at a product launch webinar? Would you still enter them as a welcome campaign, or would you move them to a different buyer journey campaign?
Oh, such a good question. I think, once again, if you truly understand your buyer's journey, right, and you have that properly mapped out, if somebody comes to a product webinar, they're probably further down, maybe consideration phase of the buyer's journey. So yeah, sending them back up to a welcome campaign probably isn't the right answer. A product campaign probably means they're further down the funnel and they probably are ready to be kind of put into pipeline. So I would absolutely then put them into a product related always on campaign versus kind of your general nurture. Or if that's a common occurrence, maybe you have a product specific welcome nurture, which I feel like I'm mixing metaphors here. But, if all the other signals about that count or that individual is like, they're still pretty top of funnel. Yes, they came to this, right? Maybe you have a welcome that is relevant. But like I said, if they come to a product, they're probably further down in the funnel, and it's probably worth putting them straight into a buyer's journey nurture.
I like it. I hope whoever asked that question did too, because that was a great question. We do every once in a while, we do like what's new release notes or what's new webinars. And it is always fascinating when we get net new contacts from those types of campaigns, because it's like, how have we not found you yet? How is this the first time we're talking to you? Okay, next one. I really like this one. We've done a few different email / content syndication / display ad programs through outside vendors. We have the leads that have engaged. What would you suggest for next steps? I have so many thoughts on this.
Why don't you
take it away?
Meghan and I are all talked out. No, I'm just kidding.
I will say, I'm so excited to have Meghan on this webinar, because she has such a great brain for this stuff. But I have just been, I'm a little jealous that I wasn't a speaker on this, because I spilled them on the podcast, but I have thoughts on there.
You did.
I could see the glimmer in your eye on that one. So
okay, so for this question, if this was me, we have gotten really good at retargeting, taking that data and just like pushing them through so many retargeting efforts. Because if they're taking actions on a third party or off site, like still online, but off of your site, and they're making those actions, everything you do from there on out should be to get them back to your website. Everything you do, get them to raise their hand, get a demo, start a conversation, even just, sign up for something organically through you. So I think that's when you have to get a little crafty about how to reach them so that they're coming back to your site. Because sometimes it's not the end action doesn't always bring them exactly where we need them. But if they've taken enough action on those third party or through third party vendors or third party campaigns, it's time. Like we got to get them on a demo request on your site. They're ready.
Love it.
Anything to add? I hate to steal the thunder.
No, I think you nailed it. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to shift away from that stuff, and we're going to talk data. Somebody wants to talk data. What are the types of data we should be considering? There's so many signals and things we could incorporate here? What do we actually listen to?
You know, I popped the slide on the end because I had a feeling that someone would want to like dive deeper into data because it is, let's see, there we go. It can be, it's a lot. And like I was saying, like I'm not a data scientist. I'm learning a lot of this, but I think it's important to understand the full breadth of the data available to us and like through Intentsify specifically. Here's a snapshot. So our, what we call orbit intelligence at Intentsify is all these disparate data points that are coming together that we're able to action on through these marketing programs. Intent data is just one of those things. And I'll say that, intent data is probably the meat of this buyer journey campaign. It's where we're figuring out the research behavior and all these intent signals, but you have a few other options here. And I think the key is that all of this data together helps Intentsify have the most like robust targeting that we can find. So, and Intentsify is a full service like marketing provider for content syndication and ad solutions. So we're doing a lot of this behind the scenes for you. I want to call out one type of data, which is really interesting and new to our repertoire here. It's business events data. And it's a newer addition. It could be interesting for one of these always on campaigns because this data includes things like important company hires, layoffs, even funding rounds, things that are happening. So if you're doing a more like one-to-one or one-to-few, like that's really granular information that you could play off of and build really unique messaging around.
Yeah.
So that's one thing to call out. Same with contact data. We're able to supplement by your buying group and get more context for your buying group to hopefully surround them and really get them going in the right direction.
Well, and one of my favorites is technographic data. So if you are in like the tech space and you have a partner ecosystem, let's say, right? And now there's tools out there like Crossbeam and Reveal, and you get that data. Setting up triggers and setting up always on campaigns that trigger off of when a prospect of yours has purchased one of your partners. For instance, perhaps we may or may not do that here at Inverta ourselves, knowing that, there's a lot of great tools out there, but so many companies buy them and then don't know what to do with them. So we can obviously help. So, that for us is a really big trigger for one of our always on streams is based on like, we've got 5 different technologies that we monitor. And when they purchase one of those technologies, we send out a note about 45 days later. Let's say, how's it going? Congratulations on your purchase. Need any help? So yeah. So that's a fun one as well.
Fun. I have technically 2 more. I just saw one pop up say, what is the podcast you're referring to? Inverta's Revenue Room podcast. Jess, how many episodes are there now?
We now have officially 10. You are number 10, Hannah. You are our 10th guest on the Revenue Room. And it's actually a really fun podcast. And it's we have practitioners on to talk about actually solving problems. Like we built it because so many of the podcasts are like thought leaders out there. Here's how you should do this. Or CMOs like, here's the way I think about things, which is great. But in reality, it doesn't always work that way, right? So we want people in the trenches who are solving for those problems day in and day out and have real solutions. And so that's who we have on. So that's why we had our friend Hannah on to really talk about nurture and like things that, she and Intentsify has struggled with in building nurture and where they've seen successes and those sorts of things. So you can learn from that. So that's all about, it's the Rev Room, not the Revenue Room.
I pulled up the title of that episode. It's called Drip No More, Nurtures Redefined, which I thought that was a good title. But
available on Spotify.
Revenue Room, it's purple, Rev Room.
Rev Room. Yes, that's on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube.
I hate to say that name, but no, it was great. And again, thank you so much for having me. Okay, I think we have time for one more. And this is a good one. How do you really coordinate so that a customer sees your content in the right order? For example, most customers don't open emails anymore. Amen. We rely heavily on LinkedIn ads. So in my experience, we can't easily funnel customers through a coordinated customer journey experience.
I think, I mean, my first thought here is that like you can't get them in order. You have to like not think of it as sequential. Like it's not going to be like, oh, Hannah's opens this thing and I want her to see this thing next and then this thing next. It's not always going to be that way. But in the example that we shared, if you're targeting by their buyer stage, you might catch them on one of the channels that you have going on, specifically messaging for that stage. So I think we always want to think of it in like a neat like framework or funnel, but that's not always the case. It's okay that they're might pop up somewhere else, and it's just figuring out where they are in their own journey, not like the theoretical one that you've defined of like, well, top funnel, mid funnel. Like I can't think of how many times like at the beginning of my content marketing career, we were just creating this content that was top funnel. Like, well, to who? It was a little generic. So like figure out what they are actually looking for at that time and try to see, maybe you'll hit them on LinkedIn, maybe email if you're lucky. Anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think here's the other thing. All of your other channels are not going to change over as frequently as the message in your email, right? You're going to have a theme for your always on campaign, and you're going to have one ad that runs for the duration. But yes, your emails are going to change over time, but that's where, it's important to have tools like either have a landing page, right? So that they can go there and get everything, or use a content hub like a Path Factory and Uberflip, one of those where people can binge on all the content. So even if they only see the 4th out of your 5 emails, when they click on it, they go to a content hub that has all the content that you wanted to share with them over the course of all of those emails, right? We do that just by course of action when we follow up to a webinar, right? We only get one chance. You get one operational email. If somebody is, say, unsubscribed from the rest of your emails, you got to make that one count. So we always attach, we have Path Factory, so we attach a Path Factory content hub so people can see all the content that's relevant to that webinar, not just necessarily the recording from that day.
And that way they can choose their own adventure, and it's not like you having to prescribe like this is the next one that you should consume. Like that's not realistic. Letting it be more in their hands, which is what we find anyway for the researching.
Yep. Cool. Whew.
Awesome.
All right. Did we do it, Hannah?
I think we did. If there are any other questions that we're not going to have time to get to, because Zoom is going to kick us off in a minute, I would say find these fine ladies on LinkedIn, and I'm sure they would. I don't want to speak on their behalf, but I'm sure they will accept your connection requests and continue the conversation. And by all means, shoot me one too, because I love this stuff. So I just do. So with that said, I thank everyone so much for joining us here today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Meghan. Thank you, Jessica. We look forward to seeing you at the next one.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Good luck with your always on.
Yeah.